Hi, everybody. Susan Storm here from Psychology Junkie, and I am super excited today to explore the world of fear and personality. I'm here joined by my husband, Daniel,
Hello,
who
hello
has
everyone.
who has
That's
ESTP
okay.
preferences, and we are going to talk about type from our different perspectives, as well as I'm a certified MBTI practitioner, so I've been working in the field of type for probably about 15 years now, and Daniel has been learning alongside me much of the way. So we are excited to take your questions. We want you to feel like you are part of this journey, that you are heard, that you're able to get those lingering thoughts that have been on your mind about type, that you wondered, is this a type thing or is this just a me thing? Feel free to ask those. I want to say hi to Doug and Cutthroat Beast. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you guys have brought some questions. And Gail, hi Gail, thanks for joining us. It's so great to have an ISFP here. We're happy to have you. So, what I'm going to do is I want to ask you, if you're watching, go ahead and drop your personality type code or your personality preferences in the chat. I would love to know the types of people that we're talking to, and so I can give you more personalized input as we're going through this exploration of type and fear. Any thoughts, Daniel, before we jump right in?
I'm excited to be here. This is we've done a couple of these with you and me live before, but I'm looking forward to getting into this with you. And we've had, I think, a lot of fun talking about it over the last couple of weeks with the idea of it, and just kind of playing around with some ideas and bouncing them back and forth, since we kind of each have different functions for ourselves that we're dealing with, just to kind of share our own fears and how they kind of show up and stuff. So it's just been really fun getting ready for this, and I'm excited to be here. I don't particularly have a fear of public speaking like you do. So like I'm like, oh, there's people, let's talk. It's gonna be fun. But
Awesome.
yeah.
That's good. That's good. You need the people who are brave and the people who are afraid. I want to say welcome, Jasmine. I'm glad you're here. Great to have an ISFJ joining us. Thank you, Karen, for joining us. We've got an ENTP with Cutthroat Beast. Cheryl, great to have you here. Robert, Karen, Tom. This is awesome. Petya and Kathy, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have such a wide variety of personality types here. And I know your time is precious. I totally get that. As a mother of 5, I get that time is limited. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and open the presentation that I made. And as we go, feel free to leave any questions that you have, any thoughts you have, or even experiences in the chat. I would love to hear from you, and it will help this whole experience to be deeper, more connecting, and just a great way for me to get to know you guys. Lightbearers Library. If you guys have not checked out Lightbearers Library, that's a great YouTube channel. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, so I am going to go ahead and explain kind of where we're coming from when it comes to type and fear. So I have noticed over 15 years of working in type that a lot of people's fears stem from this anxiety that they're going to be limited when it comes to their dominant function. Now, if you're new to type and you're not sure what a dominant function is, that is 100% okay. It's generally going to be your flow state, the mental process you live and breathe the most. So, if you are, and in this example here on the presentation, this is showing an ESFP, which I know we have an ESFP with us today. And the ESFP's dominant function is extroverted sensing. And extroverted sensing is all about living in the moment, making the most out of life. It's all about being present, being in your senses, looking for opportunities. So an ESFP who experiences fear often experiences fear around limits, sensory limits. They experience a lot of fear around things like physical immobility, sickness, getting older, and maybe not being able to be as mobile as they would like. Another source of fear can stem from the inferior function. The inferior function is one we tend to kind of sweep under the rug because we don't feel as confident with it, but it's still a major part of who we are. In fact, the reason I'm showing a spine here is because the dominant and inferior function are essentially the core of self. They're the core of who you are. And they need each other to have balance. An ESFP in this example, who is not very balanced, maybe they don't have a good connection to their inferior function, might make a lot of really impulsive or reckless decisions because they're so focused on what would be fun in the moment that they aren't thinking ahead to the possible ramifications of that. So these dominant and inferior function are really, really important. And they also are the source of a lot of our fears when it comes to personality type. We have fears that either our dominant function will be limited or attacked in some way. We won't be able to use it. We won't be able to rely on it. Or we fear that we won't be able to integrate our inferior function, and then we'll have all sorts of fallout associated with that. Now, if you, like I said, if you don't know what the functions are, it is 100% okay. You do not have to be an expert in type to be able to follow along with this discussion. I'm explaining that, but as we go, I will explain in everyday terms how fear tends to show up for the types. And I want you to be part of this, like I said. So let me know if you're relating, if you have a thought or a story to share, or just a question. So I just want to make sure I reiterate that. I'll probably be saying that way too much as we go along. Cynthia, I'm glad you're here. JJ, Ann, awesome to have you here. So the first type that we are going to look at, or the set of types we're going to look at, are the INFJs and the INTJs. So INFJs are dominant, introverted intuitives. They're always looking for the meaning behind things. They're less interested in what's going on the surface of reality, like the tangible things you can touch, see, taste, and experience. And they're more interested in what's going on behind the scenes. What's the meaning behind it? What's the pattern behind it? What kind of symbols are there? And they're always trying to narrow down their options to find some kind of prediction for the future. So it's very future-oriented. Their dominant function tends to be very abstract, very conceptual, okay? The more tangible and day-to-day something is, the less interested INFJs and INTJs tend to be in it. Whereas the more big picture and conceptual something is, the more excited INFJs and INTJs are about it. Any INFJs or INTJs watching relate? If you do, let me know in the comments. But INFJs and INTJs also have inferior extroverted sensing. So that's the function that's all about being present, spotting details, making the most out of each moment, being realistic, focusing on those tangible realities of life. When INFJs are leaning too heavily into introverted intuition, they can become so lost in thoughts and ideas that they lose track of the physical world around them. So some signs that someone has inferior extroverted sensing are: 1, they struggle to stay present. They're often lost in their head. 2, they can feel clumsy or self-conscious with their body. 3, during stress, they can overindulge in their senses by maybe overeating, drinking too much, doom scrolling, shopping, things like that. Number 4, they can be very hypersensitive to sensory commotion. INFJs and INTJs often feel really overwhelmed by a lot of sensory stimulation. That's like they can, dim lights are usually preferred to bright lights. There's not a lot of noise, things like that. And this part of themselves is one that they tend to feel a lot of vulnerability around. But at the same time, they do wish that they could have this connection to extroverted sensing. They do wish they could feel more grounded in their bodies and in the world around them. They wish spontaneity wasn't so scary to them. So that's where some of their fears come in. And I love Lisa. Thank you for joining us, Louise. I know that a lot of you are relating to what I'm talking about here. And I'm an INTJ, so I'm speaking from personal experience. I definitely relate to this. And Daniel, my husband, knows because he lives with me day in, day out, sees this all the time. So here's where I've seen a lot of fears when it comes to INFJs and INTJs. 1, a fear of losing control. They think to themselves, if I stop analyzing things, if I stop trying to understand the meaning behind things and I just jump into action, I'll probably mess up. I'll probably do something stupid. I might do something really embarrassing. And one thing I've seen again and again with INJs is that they feel a lot of embarrassment when they have to be really responsive in the physical world. That can show up like being afraid of public dancing or doing karaoke. It can be afraid of driving in a new city if someone is in the car with you because you feel like, oh, I'm going to mess up and they're going to judge me for that. Another fear can be sensory chaos. We talked a little bit about this. Loud noises, clutter, overstimulating environments can feel really overwhelming to them. Another thing that really bothers them is the feeling that they might not be able to keep up with changes as the world is progressing. So introverted intuition, it's really focused on narrowing down possibilities in order to make predictions about things and understanding what's going to happen, what the ripple effects are going to be of what's happening in the world today. And one way I can explain this is with my own self as an example. I am always trying to figure out where the world is going, technologically speaking, culturally speaking, the welfare of humanity, things like this. Daniel knows, he's probably feeling like, yes, I hear about this all the time. Right now in the world with artificial intelligence and all these rapid changes that are happening, they're multiplying possibilities so quickly I can't keep up. Like it used to be, I could kind of predict how the world was going to look in a certain number of years, and I often turned out to be right. But right now, with everything that's happening with artificial intelligence, I'm like, there are infinite possibilities of how this could go. That is something that really can be a struggle for INFJs, INTJs. If they feel like their long-term vision can't keep up with reality, then that can kind of scare them because they're literally wired to narrow down those possibilities and find something that they can cling to as a potential future. They often fear spending so much time in their heads that they never really live. So that's where that inferior function comes in. INFJs, INTJs, they can be so in their head, so focused on concepts and ideas that they struggle to actually smell the roses and actually do things that make them feel alive. Now, I want to, first of all, address some of the comments that are showing up here. I see Cynthia, she said, learning analysis distracts from being present or a part of events. Yeah, sometimes when you are so focused on what's going on in your head, you can miss the really beautiful things that are happening around you. And that can be a real struggle for INFJs and INTJs. And then Doug, I relate to you as well. Natural light is good. Artificial arg, 100%. Anytime I walk into a room and the light's too bright, I immediately feel very, very uncomfortable. Yes, and Lisa, I can go for a walk and never see anything. 100%. A common theme with INJs is they get home from driving somewhere and they're like, wait, I don't remember driving. How did I even get here? So that's one of those really funny things. And then I see Payun doom scrolling. Yeah, absolutely. So Daniel, as the ESTP in the group, any thoughts on what you're hearing from INJs or anything you want to add to this before we go on to the next set of types?
So I just a couple of things to, I don't know, for me, it helped kind of clarify it and thinking about it is if we go back, if we went back a couple of your slides, we're talking about the spine, how those two functions are really, they're working in tandem. They are helping to balance the individual out because they are kind of opposites. So, like I was talking with you about it, and it's like in my mind, I just picture like a weight kind of tethered to my back, and I'm able to lean forward and confidently go forward because I have this weight, which for me is NI, kind of back there grounding me from just my reality of the everyday world that I'm interacting in. And I love just the reality of, I mean, if I went on a walk, I see everything. I see all the details. I'm immersed in the here and the now because I'm an SE Dom. But that NI, that introverted intuition for as my inferior kind of does help me think about like, okay, yes, I love being out in the woods and going on walks and seeing all these things. But if this is all I did, then none of my other goals will get done. So it helps balance me. I can lean forward into that. And so the fear for me is if I got out of balance with that, really, if I went too far into SE or if I got pulled too far into NI, that's where my fears start showing up, is when that is all out of balance. So, and that's true for every type with their dominant and inferior function. It's that balance that really puts you in a healthy spot. I think the fears that we see in that show up in every type is good to have if you have someone that can kind of help balance that out for you. Like I'm lucky that I have you, with you being, introverted, intuitive, dominant, that I can kind of be like, okay, here's what my NI is saying, but because mine's inferior, I don't always trust it, right? Like it's not really well developed. It's not what I'm comfortable using. So the fear that might come up because of my NI, I can kind of come to you with that and be like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm projecting. I don't know if I'm like completely whacked out of my mind on this idea, or if this actually falls in line with what you're seeing. So having someone that you can bounce that off of and be able to do that with can help kind of alleviate some of those fears, if you have a way of interacting with someone on those that handles it better than you.
I love that advice. Yeah, if you seek out or have friendships or relationships with people who are different from you but still understand and are patient and curiosity about the way you work, so that they're not just putting you down for your differences, but they're actually encouraging you in them. That can be a great way for you to grow as a person. And that actually helps with one of the questions we got. Doug asked, do they ever fight with each other instead of working together? And I think you're talking about dominant and inferior. And they absolutely do fight with each other sometimes. That's the part of, in the case of the INFJ or INTJ, there can be this strong desire to kind of sit and ponder something for a very long time, and a hesitancy to take action, a fear that if you jump into action, you're going to mess it up. And that kind of goes to the top bullet point here. If I stop analyzing and just act, I'll make a mess or miss something important. So sometimes INFJs, INTJs, they can get into this habit of constantly conceptualizing and staying in this heady space and resisting action. So it's kind of like they're cutting off SE, their inferior function that wants action. And the same way, extroverted sensing can fight with introverted intuition. If you're really stressed as an INFJ or an INTJ, then your extroverted sensing inferior function, that part of you that does want action, that does want experience, that does want sensory pleasure or immersion, that part of you can take over and be like, no, I'm in charge now. And that's when you get the INFJs and INTJs who are, they're out there eating all their stress, right? Or they're drinking all their stress, or they're doom scrolling all their stress, or they're shopping or things like that. They are leaning too far into the unhealthy side of extroverted sensing. So that is definitely a way that they can fight with each other. And then Payun asked, what about fear of public embarrassment for INTJs? Is it usual for INTJs or more for other types? So one thing that I noticed when I actually surveyed all the types about this was a while ago, is that everyone mentioned public speaking. That was like a big fear for especially the introverted types. I noticed that all introverted types tended to mention public speaking quite a bit. So I think that is generally associated with introversion. Introversion tends to, anyone who's an introvert is going to need more time to simmer on things before they say them. The world inside their mind feels really clear, but the minute they start putting things out there, it can start to feel a little messy. So public speaking can be a bit scary for an introvert because you have to respond. You have to keep speaking. You can't just stop for 5 minutes, collect your thoughts while everyone's there waiting for you to say something. So public speaking can be definitely a huge challenge for introverted types, extroverted types as well. I mean, anxiety doesn't have any boundaries really. And then John, I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're here. You did not miss the ISTJ part yet. Mr. J, I'm glad you're here. Awesome to have another ESTP in the room.
Represent.
So glad to have, I'm so excited that we have so many different types. And actually, speaking of ISTJs, that's our next set we're going to talk about is ISFJs and ISTJs. So ISFJs and ISTJs are dominant introverted sensing types. These types like things to be familiar. They like stability. They like continuity. They like ritual and tradition and routine. They like knowing that their decisions are grounded in wisdom from their past lived experiences. They look for things that are known and verifiable to them. So this tends to create a person or personality type that is very consistent, someone who's very dependable, responsible, someone you can count on. The inferior function of ISFJs and ISTJs is extroverted intuition. In many ways, it looks like the total other side of the coin. And extroverted intuition is about exploring the unknown, hypothetical questions, finding random connections between things. But when extroverted intuition is in that inferior position, it can mean that ISTJs and ISFJs feel really anxious when they have to face unknown situations, when they have to deal with change. When you feel like you have to improvise on the spot and you don't have time to prepare, look at past precedent, or learn from what you've been through before, that can feel super, super scary as an ISJ type. ISJ types tend to like what's familiar. So they tend to be the types, if they go on a trip, for example, they're going to have their favorite spots that they like to go to again and again. Each time it gets richer and richer. Or when they go out to eat, they probably have a favorite meal at the restaurant. Now, if they were to go somewhere new that they've never been before, it might be kind of scary at first. They don't know what to expect. What if they get lost? What if it's not what they hoped it would be? What if it's just a huge confusing experience for them? There's often a lot of fear for ISJs in going into those new experiences. And when they're stressed, ISFJs and ISTJs can really get stuck in these like what if doom and gloom scenarios, like kind of overwhelmed by negative possibilities. So that's another thing that can be really scary for an ISFJ or an ISTJ. At the same time, they worry, what if I'm too focused on my own security? What if I'm so focused on what I know that I'm missing out on these really amazing, profound opportunities because maybe I'm too stuck in a rut. So that's another fear. And I see Karen, my boyfriend is ISFJ, and he definitely likes familiar environments. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the familiar is so special for ISFJs and ISTJs. And it's that they get the sense of meaning when they can revisit things that matter to them. Like if they really loved a book, it's like when they can read that book again, it just makes that whole experience richer and more meaningful to them. And then John says, dealing with change can make me literally shake all over at times under the right circumstances. Thank you, John, for sharing that. I mean, that change is really hard. As an INJ, even change can be really challenging for me, just because it means you have to work with those, that extroverted side of yourself a little bit more. So here are some things that come up again and again for ISFJs and ISTJs when it comes to fears. One is fear of unpredictability, sudden change, new systems. What if I can't handle it? What if everything falls apart? Another thing is the fear of losing the traditions or routines that give them safety. So I know of quite a few ISFJs, ISTJs personally, and one thing that really scares them is having to seeing the world changing and feeling like all the age-old meaningful traditions that they've relied on are becoming obsolete. That's something that tends to really create a lot of fear for the ISJs that I know personally. For example, I know ISFJ and ISTJ moms who do not like technology and how it's affecting children, the younger generation. They want to hold on to kind of the innocence and joy of the 90s, like what they experienced as children. Another fear is being replaced. That the wisdom that they have gleaned from years and years of experience, the stuff that they have really mastered and perfected, will become unimportant someday in the future. So that's another fear that, again, we can bring artificial intelligence into this. Some SJs I know are worried that with the advances artificial intelligence is making, that maybe their jobs that they have worked for all their lives, the things that they're really experts at, maybe they won't be needed. And that can be really, really scary. I want to say hi, Di, for ENFP. And then Cutthroat B says, I know a few family members who are SIDMs, or at least one of them is. So it's great that we can, be bringing in and relating this to people we know. I think understanding type can create a lot of empathy for people who are different from us, and empathy and understanding where other people are coming from with those fears. Daniel, you have some SJs in your family. We have an SJ child, an ISJ child. Yes. Any thoughts on how you see this fear showing up? If you have any examples.
Oh, for sure. I mean, my dad was an ISTJ, and we have a son that's an ISJ, and getting out of routine, unexpectedly getting out of routine, not having time to prepare for the change is definitely hard on them. and adds anxiety. My dad being an ISTJ, like if we were going to go on a vacation or drive somewhere that he was unfamiliar with, like he would spend a lot of time looking over maps, getting familiar in his head with the route that we were going to go on. And so that definitely helped to, probably quelch some of those fears so that, he's like, okay, I know what we need to do from here to here to here. Even if he'd never been there before, he had an idea of what to expect. So, my dad and I remodeled a house when I was a kid, or the house that we lived in. And we faced a lot of things that he'd never dealt with before. And if it didn't go according to plan, it was definitely something that you could see him getting like, kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily a fear per se. That's one way it could definitely be interpreted, I suppose, but like of trying to figure out what to do in that scenario. Because what he tried or what he thought should work or something he had done before didn't work. And so that was like, it just threw, all the plans out the window because he didn't know what to do then. So, and I see that even with our son, it's like, okay, he likes knowing ahead of time what the plan is. And if things are sprung on him suddenly, he definitely feels much more anxious about dealing with that situation. So, yeah, those are definitely ways that can show up for them. Absolutely. And Gigi, I would have to say, I 100% agree that my wife is an amazing partner and super, super glad that I found her. Maybe some other time we can go into how that all happened.
Yeah, we need to do like a just random Q&A. But yeah, we knew each other since we were kids.
Yeah.
So it's been a long, long relationship, that's for sure. And so yes, thank you so much about that. That's a nice compliment.
Absolutely.
And then I put Robert's statement up here. He said, definitely fear of being unprepared. Yeah. ISFJs are and ISTJs, they want to know all the details before they get into something, and a lot of preparation so that they can feel competent, like they know exactly, they visualized it ahead of time. So the next set of types we're getting into are the ENFPs and the ENTPs, the extroverted intuitive types. I'm curious, I'm trying to remember if we have Cutthroat Beast is an ENTP, and then we have Di. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct. Day or Di is an ENFP. So I'm glad we've got some ENPs here. Welcome, Monica. Glad you're here. So ENFPs and ENTPs, they are driven by this hunger for possibility, this hunger for potential, for new ideas, for the magic of what could be. They're less interested in the things that currently exist, what's happening in this moment, and they're more excited about what kind of ideas am I getting from the things that are happening now? What kind of potential am I seeing? What connections am I spotting? So they have this restlessness to explore, to discover, to be more curious, to encounter new and novel ideas that will broaden the way that they understand the world. Everything about the unknown feels really magical to them. Everything about the potential feels just full of inspiration. So they're very future oriented, they're very big picture oriented. They're the kind of people you need when those tried and true solutions are failing you, and you need to be able to think outside the box. And Day, thank you for helping me with your name. I'm sorry I was mispronouncing that. And Linda, I'm glad you're here. Glad to have an ENFP here. So ENFPs, ENTPs, full of curiosity, full of passion, very driven by inspiration. And then there's that inferior introverted sensing. And that's the part that kind of wants to pull them down to earth really hard. It's the part of them that's like, okay, but you should really try to create some consistent habits, or maybe you should do your taxes. That part. Introverted sensing is very good at the details that give life some groundedness and stability. But when it's inferior, when you are an ENFP and an ENTP and you have inferior SI, it can mean that you struggle a lot with consistency, with routine, with follow through. You might find that you start a dozen projects and struggle to finish them. Your room might be filled with half completed experiments and books you started writing and didn't finish. That's a common experience for ENPs. You can feel uneasy about commitments. as an ENP because commitments are cutting out options for you. So whether that's a relationship commitment, a job commitment, there's so many ways that this can show up where you feel like, oh, but I'm cutting out my options. And extrovert intuition is always wanting to add options, not cut them out. So that can be scary. There's a lot of fear of stagnation, of just not being able to brainstorm, not being able to innovate, not being able to put your own creative stamp on something. A lot of times ENFPs and ENTPs feel really fearful of being in situations where they have to do things by the book, where they have a lot of rules and relationships. That can rules around their relationships or rules around how they have to do things at work. Micromanagement can be super scary. And at the same time, even though they tend to have a lot of anxieties and fears around these introverted sensing themed parts of their life, they can also worry that maybe they'll, move from project to project, idea to idea, and never really create the stability that every human needs, some of that in life. Maybe they worry sometimes that they won't create a firm or strong foundation for their life. And so that can be a real fear, and that can lead to some of the fears that are in this next slide. I also wanted to say, Gregory, thank you for bringing up some of the ENTJ fears also. I often don't get enough ENTJ feedback, so I really appreciate that. So fears that I have heard again and again from ENFPs and ENTPs, fear of stagnation. So that routine, that stability, taking care of the day to day, it really can feel just like you're withering away as an ENFP or an ENTP. It can feel like I wrote here, it can feel a little bit like death. Because when you are just taking care of these predictable day-to-day things, if there's no room for inspiration, if there's no room for, possibility, it can just feel like you are wasting all the, intuitive, magic in life, all that wonder about creating something new, exploring something new, finding an abstract connection between things. It's just so day-to-day, and you're going to have to just keep doing it over and over again. It feels like walking on, being in a hamster wheel. Another thing is just fear of missing potential. If you are limited, say by, commitments, like we talked about earlier, it can feel like, all these doors closing and you want to open those doors. There's a fear of being ordinary. ENFPs, ENTPs, and if you're watching this and you are an INFP or an INTP, you can probably relate to a lot of this as well. There's just a fear of not being able to, stretch your wings and try new things and be free. Fear of waking up one day and looking at your life and going, man, I just did the same thing day in and day out. And that fear of that tends to guide so many life decisions for ENFPs and ENTPs. Many of them try to be entrepreneurs so that they aren't feeling restricted by an outside boss or something like that. There's also a fear of burnout. So ENFPs and ENTPs tend to actually experience a lot of mental burnout. That part of their brain that's always connecting these dots and it's always trying to extrapolate new possibilities. It's a very high energy, it takes a lot of energy to be able to do that. So many ENFPs and ENTPs I've known are insomniacs. They struggle to sleep. They struggle to take care of those day-to-day physical needs because they're so focused on the novel. They're so focused on exploration. And that introverted sensing inferior function, that's really good at being like, oh, I need to make sure that I get, this many grams of protein every day and that I, keep track of all the little nitty-gritty details of life. And for ENFPs, ENTPs, that can be a real challenge. So sometimes there's, fear around, what if I'm not taking care of myself? What if my health is deteriorating because I don't remember to drink enough water or I'm not sleeping enough? That can be a big fear. Another thing can be a fear of regret. Like maybe I'm chasing after all these new possibilities, but what if I, in the process, make a whole bunch of mistakes? Or there's a lot of fallout related to that. Like maybe I forgot to do my taxes. And now the IRS is coming for me. Things like that. I want to see if there's any questions real quick. Doug says, I really pop with the micromanagement, inspiration, and fear of losing the magic. Absolutely. I think, Doug, did you say INFJ? I think it was INFJ. I could be wrong, but that's generally intuitive dominant types are extremely driven by inspiration. Inspiration is the ultimate drive of all things. And so if you feel like you have to, if you are, whether you're any intuitive type at all, actually, there's going to be a fear of when you're focusing very much on day-to-day details that you are losing yourself somewhere, that you're losing your sense of magic and wonder. So that's very common. Tom says ENTPs don't join groups. And yeah, I have definitely seen that to be true before. I've definitely known some ENTPs in groups, but it's fairly loose. You know, these are not groups with very many rules. I'll say that much. And yeah, I appreciate these comments. He's really making it. It's just great to hear from other people. John, an ISTJ, says feeling less than, being nothing more than ordinary, something I'm struggling with as an ISTJ as well. And yes, ISTJs can and ISFJs can also struggle with that. There's that, they're really good at the consistency part. They're really good at creating that stability. But there is that pull of the inferior function that's like, well, maybe you're missing out on some of the magic by being so focused on that. And that's why we need both those functions to balance each other out. Any thoughts from you, Daniel? I know I've been, talking a lot here.
No, you're good. Something I was just thinking about, especially with John's comment, is that, ISJs and ENPs will probably often have some of their fears cross-relate with their functions being opposite each other. Some of that will cross over, so there will be some resonance there with each other's fears. We have a daughter that we believe is an ENP. You could probably guess it just by walking into her room. Like, she loves to craft, and she gets inspiration from like books and pictures, but she wants to do it her own way with her own ideas and her own things. And so we see this like desire to just spread out and explore all the possibilities of all the things she can do and all the things her brain can come up with. And I see every day when I'm like, hey, it's time for school, a little bit of that death roll into her eyes of, oh, we're back on a schedule. We're back on this routine. So something that, if you're an ENP and you're struggling with that, something that has helped with her is, yeah, it's good to have that routine. It's good to have that schedule, but look for ways to just use your creativity inside the schedule. Like, if she has to write some kind of a report, she gets to choose the topic and all of these other parts of it. So it kind of gives her the best of both worlds. But yeah, no, definitely, I think the routine for her at her young age is the biggest fear she faces. For sure.
Yeah, and I one thing we both noticed is we have an ENP. We believe she's probably ENTP, and then we have an ISFJ, also. And we noticed that when we go on vacation, the ISFJ is more difficult because he's out of routine. So he becomes more demanding and more stressed. He acts out a bit more. I mean, he's a wonderful kid. It's not like he's being super difficult, but he becomes more just difficult in general. And she becomes, as an ENTP, super easy because everything's different. You never know what's going to happen. Every day is different. She's in her comfort zone. So she becomes the easiest kid you ever met. And then when we come home and things are really consistent and stable, she's got to rebel against that and push against those boundaries. And he's really calm and grounded. And that's one thing you'll notice if you have an ISJ ENP couple or something like that. The ENP is like, yay, everything's different. Look what we did today spontaneously. And the ISJ is like dying inside. And then vice versa. It can flip. And at the same time, both types can help each other grow and help each other mature as long as they're patient. They're not condescending, because that can be a problem. And that's probably something we'll bring up in another stream, because I could really go on a big, long tangent about that. And Pei-Yun, thank you for adding your comment. You said, I'll show that. That's so true. My boss is an ENTP, and he is awake at 3 a.m. thinking about work, and he replies to stuff at night. 100%. I feel like so many ENPs I meet are doing stuff in the middle of the night. They're so they have a hard time quieting down that just restless mental energy that they're known for. Day, you said, I've come to love the structure, though. And I think that's one thing that I have noticed too is a lot of times as ENPs grow, as they get older, as they, especially 30s and 40s, they start to integrate that introverted sensing a little bit more. So they become a little bit more, accepting and even liking some of the things that create that stability. So that does tend to, that introverted sensing strength and integration does tend to develop with age, especially if you don't feel like you're not given opportunities to stretch your wings. Like if you feel like you have a balance, like you are getting time for your extroverted intuition to breathe, then you can like the structure part better because you know that that dominant function is getting its needs met. So these are some great comments. Thank you so much. And then Lisa asked, ENPs probably not a good fit with regular school, are they? I actually did a survey many years ago. I asked all the different types, what type of schooling do you think would have been best? Would it have been like traditional public school, private school, homeschool, unschooling? Like I threw all the options out there. And I found that ENPs definitely had more of a preference for, they really liked unschooling, but they also are really social generally. So there was a lot of votes for public school just because it gives them a chance to spend time around a wide variety of people. INPs were definitely the types most likely to pick unschooling, homeschooling, because they really had a difficult time with that really overly structured part of public school.
And I think also for ENPs, because they are so curious and so driven to find new and novel things, that if they're learning something new, they're excited about it. It's when they have to do the repetition to not forget it, or if they have to recall it and reuse it, that it becomes more of an issue. But if it's a new topic or a new portion of something, or like my daughter loves chemistry because it's hands-on. She gets to see these new reactions and things, and she absolutely loves that part. But it's the repetition and the recall that she doesn't like.
Yeah, a lot of times where you lose the EP types. And this goes for both ESFPs, ESTPs, and the ENPs, is anything that feels really rote and repetitive. They do best in those collaborative group projects where they get to bounce ideas off of each other and get their hands dirty and really make something happen and experiment. That's the world where the EPs are going to be way more happy. Which brings me to ESFPs and ESTPs. These are the dominant extroverted sensing types. These types are all about living in the moment, about getting their hands dirty, getting in touch with the world of the senses. So they tend to spot opportunities, details, opportunities for fun. Life is to be enjoyed. They have this philosophy of, well, you only live once. You really need to amp up the experience if you can. So they trust their tangible experience. They trust what they know. They also tend to be realists. So rather than imagining what could be or trying to predict how things are going to unravel in 5, 10, 20 years, these are the types who are really tuned into what's happening right now. A box is a box is a box. A box isn't a symbol for, I don't know, the afterlife or, something else. It is just a box. So you often find with ESFPs and ESTPs that they're very realistic types, very factual, but they're also very fun-loving. There is the issue that comes in with them of inferior introverted intuition. So that introverted intuition is so different from extroverted sensing. Instead of being focused on the now and the present and the senses, it's focused on the concepts, the ideas, all the, stuff going on, the meanings behind things, not so much the things themselves. And so inferior introverted intuition can show up as, struggling to predict long-term impacts or to make plans. A lot of ESFPs and ESTPs, they don't really enjoy making plans, or, especially if it's like a 10, 20-year plan, because they have in their mind well, we don't know how things are going to go. It seems arrogant to predict that things are going to go a certain way. Things could change. So they don't generally like making a lot of plans. Mr. J says ESTPs equal realism, facts here and now. And I 100% agree on that. I think Daniel and ESTP would also agree. Yep. And then Karen says, I hate making long-term plans. Yeah. Daniel, I'm sure you're relating and nodding along to a lot of this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so with the dominant function of SE being all about the reality of what's in front of us, like probably one of the phrases I feel like I hear myself using the most, especially with you, it's almost become kind of a joke, is it's like, it is what it is, right? Like I don't
Yeah.
read anything else into it. I don't try to extrapolate anything from it. Like it just is what it is. And so to me, trying to read something into it is difficult. And sometimes I don't want to, because I know there may be underlying meanings or things that go along with it, but I might not like what those are. So it's nicer and easier just to look at things being what they are and sticking into the reality of the here and now. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and ESPs, are they the people you want in a make or break situation, like a crisis situation, where you need someone who's got a steady head on their shoulders, who can be aware of their surroundings and look for solutions. And I mean, they're awesome in those situations. I remember I brought this example up before, but I remember I was at a mom's night and my truck got stuck in the mud, and me and the other moms were like, oh no, what do we do? Like, nothing's working. And this ESFP friend of mine, she's like, I got this. She's like, she was like jumping on the back of the truck. Like, she knew all the tricks. She wasn't scared at all. In fact, it was exciting for her. She was so bored at the mom's night, all the conversation. And she was just like, oh my gosh, kill me now. Because it was a lot, a lot of just chit chat. And SE DOMs, I mean, ESFPs and ESTPs, they always have a hunger for action. So sitting around talking for a long, long time can feel like death to an ESFP or an ESTP. So if they have sometimes when a crisis erupts and there's something they have to do to take action, that's actually can be super exciting for them. Like, yes, I can finally do what I was born to do. I can get into action, and especially in an unexpected situation. But again, that inferior intuition, introvert intuition, that can create frustration with, making the plans, ironing things out for the future. They can ignore warning signs until hindsight makes the patterns obvious. That's one of the bullet points I wrote down. Many times ESPs, because they live more moment to moment, and they're not necessarily always tuned into, what's caused. Let me look for the deeper meaning behind what's causing this. Then it can be, 2 years later, they look back and they're like, oh my gosh, now I see what was so obvious. There was this pattern of whatever it is, like maybe this certain type of decision-making trouble that was really getting in their way, but they sometimes don't realize it till, further down the road. And that can create a lot of insecurity and stress for ESFPs and ESTPs. They can feel vulnerable or ashamed of themselves when they realize this. They can also, even though they love living in the moment, they love the experience of life. They love the touch, the taste, the feel, the textures of what it means to be alive. And they're so good at like helping other people appreciate that as well. Something that they can often fear is that in their, living moment to moment, maybe there's something deeper that they're missing. I've talked to a lot of ESPs who worry that because they are living moment to moment and they sometimes forget the moment or they just move on from it, that maybe there's a lack of a deeper meaning. And that can be really scary for them. And that's something I've heard also from Daniel, not to put you on the spot, but
No,
that's
you're
something
good.
that you've also struggled with
Yeah.
a bit.
You want there to be meaning behind the actions, for sure.
Yeah. And so I know we've already kind of talked about some of these. It might feel a little bit repetitive, some of these fears that ESPs deal with. But one is that missing their purpose, that they're living fast, they're living more on impulse, but that maybe they're not actually getting anywhere meaningful. And then another one would be the fear of consequences catching up. A lot of ESPs like to be really physically active. And according to the MBTI manual, a lot of ESPs overdo it when it comes to the physical, like sports or working out or taking physical risks. And then they end up with chronic pain as a result. I don't quote me on this, but I think it was ESTPs and ISTPs actually that have the highest incidence of chronic pain related to overdoing it in the physical world. And Daniel, I know you have experience with that. I don't know if you feel
Yeah.
like sharing kind of how that shows up for you as an ESTP.
Yeah, no, I mean it's frustrating. So I mean I was in the military for 11 years, and due to my time there, I've got some chronic pain and things that I'm going to be dealing with the rest of my life, and it is something that drives me crazy because I do often think, oh, if I had insert use NI, thought ahead, or seen the bigger picture, um, then I could have prevented this. I could have done something different instead of just being like, I was known to just be gung ho and be like, I don't care if it's the hard way, I can do it faster that way, so I'm just going to do that. Um, like I'm gonna force this to happen, regardless of the consequence, because I get to the end result. Um, and so then, yeah, you get on the backside of doing that over and over and over and over for years, and you're left with this physical regret. That's how I look at it. Is it's a constant and daily reminder of the regret of having not planned better in the moment. Um,
Yeah, this shows up whenever we move houses. We moved a lot being a military family. And every time he's like, no, I'll move the piano by myself. I don't need any help. And I'm always like, no, we should hire piano movers. You're gonna hurt yourself. You already have chronic pain. He's like, no, no, no. I can do it myself. So I definitely see this a lot. And I think there's a lot of SPs in the military. And a lot of them, I'm sure that you've seen this a lot with people who you were with in the military, you're still friends with, that a lot of
oh
are
yeah.
struggling with that chronic pain as well.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, John, I'm sorry that you're also dealing with some chronic pain. It's makes everyday life so much more challenging. Another fear that ESFPs, ESTPs can have is boredom. I mean, and that kind of we talked a little bit about that, but anytime life feels mundane, it feels stagnant, you aren't moving enough, you aren't engaging enough with the world, like having a cubicle office job, that kind of thing feels like decay to an ESP. If they're not moving, if they're not physically interacting with the world in some way, then it can feel just absolutely mind-blowingly like just numbing to them. And this is why a lot of times you'll run into where sensing perceiver kids struggle in school. And it's not because they're not smart, because actually they tend to be really clever. It's that a lot of, especially for ESPs, a lot of the sitting still and just listening and being at a desk and not being able to move. If you move a lot in school, you're a problem child, you're a distraction. And so a lot of ESPs really struggle in school because they feel like they have to just be putting all this energy into just staying still, and they feel like they're wasting all this time. And whereas if they could move and learn, if they could get up and run around and learn, if they could find a way to make it kinesthetic, then it would be a lot more exciting for them. They'd be able to, if they could see where they can use it in the real world too, then that's a lot more exciting for them also. Where the inferior function can show up in fears is fear of wasted potential. And we talked about that in the last slide. So, this is a little repetitive, but the fear that in living moment to moment, that they aren't building anything meaningful maybe in the process. So that is definitely a huge fear. I see Gigi, you said you have seen something similar with an ISTP, and yeah, it's a real challenge. So we are going to, do you want to have anything, Daniel, you want to add before we move on to the next types?
I mean, I'm an ESTP, so like I could just like go on and on and on. But I think of all of these things that I see up here that you've listed as fears, for me personally, the biggest one is fear of losing control. And while like the ways that you have it listed up here are accurate, like illness or limiting your options or things like that, for me, it's losing being in a situation where I'm not allowed to uh, use my physical ability in a situation, because I trust my uh, I don't know, like my senses more than I would trust someone else's, right? Because
Yeah.
I know that I'm seeing things for exactly where they are. I've had a lifetime of reacting to things and being faster than most people to react to things, and correctly react to them. And so if that's taken away from me, if I'm not allowed to do that, or I'm restricted in that way somehow, that is like, that's almost the worst thing, is to not have the ability to use my reaction or my knowledge or my ability to handle a situation that I know I could do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of where the whole not wanting someone else to move the piano thing comes in. I noticed that a lot of times with you, and I've seen this with other SPs as well, it's like, no, I got this. Let me handle this.
Yeah.
And one thing that I will say is that, when it comes to our dominant function, regardless of your personality type, that tends to be your hero function. That tends to be the function when you feel like you've got this, that energy of you've got this, oftentimes it's around your dominant function. So if someone's like, oh no, I don't know what to do in order to achieve such and such objective, that's where I often feel like, oh, I've got this energy as an INTJ. I'd be like, oh, well, you want to achieve this? Here's, where the world's going, and here's the strategy, right? Whereas for an ESP, it's like the physical world, physical
absolutely.
competence, reaction time, spotting details, being realistic, responding to life as it happens. That's where they have that, I've got this energy. Mm-hmm. And Gigi says, so that's how people feel about their relationship with their hero function when they compare themselves to others. Yeah, absolutely. You 100% on point. And thank you, Tom. I'm glad you're enjoying this. And Gregory, poor leadership is definitely terrifying for ENTJs. Well, it's terrifying for any type, but I think especially for ENTJs, and we'll get into that a little bit when we get to ENTJs too.
I mean, I'm, as an ESTP, that's been my biggest pet peeve in every job I've had, is seeing people above me just doing things illogically or not using it. Anyway, it drives me crazy.
Yeah, 100%. And to the ITPs who are joining us, we're finally on to your types, so I'm excited about this one. INTPs and ISTPs, dominant introverted thinking types. These types want to understand how things work, and not just things like objects, but ideas, theories. You'll find that we're INTPs, they love learning all the nitty gritty nooks and crannies of, say, a philosophy or a scientific concept or a technology, or maybe even a religious theory. Like, it can branch out in so many ways. ISTPs, the ones that I know, they love learning about, how to put together a computer, whether it's, sometimes they work with, car engines, like any kind of hands-on way of understanding how something works is really appealing to them. But introverted thinking is constantly trying to understand how something works. It wants to know for itself how something works, or what the truth is about something. INTPs, ISTPs don't take other people's word for it. They need to understand what's logical and what's accurate for themselves. So they need to test their ideas. They need to poke holes in their theories and their beliefs in order to see what still stands up. They tend to be very skeptical. They look for precise definitions, precise word usage. They tend to be more distrusting of just their own feelings, their own emotions, things like that. But they also have inferior extroverted feeling. And so the inferior function for them can mean that they struggle to read emotional cues. In group situations, in big social situations, these types can feel kind of unsettled, a little vulnerable and insecure, worried that they're not, maybe they're saying too much, maybe they're not saying enough, maybe they're reading the room wrong. There's more insecurity for ITPs in how they are interpersonally connecting with other people. Because of that, they sometimes avoid situations where they would have to express themselves emotionally. Sometimes they feel, they struggle in relationships where there's a lot of emotional sharing. They might repress their emotions until they burst out, especially during stress. They might feel like these emotions are getting the better of them if they're really, really stressed. Often they have fears around rejection or abandonment. But they also, and we'll get to the next slide, they also have a lot of fears around stupidity or incompetence. So ITPs, they really want to have mastery about logic, about information, about data. They want to know that they've got it right. And they're not afraid to ask themselves the tough questions to find out whether they really believe in something that's true. And sometimes that means that they leave their childhood religion. Sometimes it means they come back to a religion. I mean, it means that they tend to be skeptical of political sides. I've just been running a political survey, actually, and I found that the ITPs, more so than other types, are more often to be kind of non-committal about what political party they're a part of. They're more likely to be libertarian or independent. And they have some things they like about some parties and some things they don't like. They tend to be very much their own people, very independent, they like autonomy. And so they really fear incompetence in themselves, stupidity in themselves, but like more so that they have to work with stupid people, or that they have to be under the leadership of someone stupid. And I think someone commented here about that. Being managed or under the leadership of someone who really isn't thinking things through, who uses logical fallacies, who their plan is incompetent in some way, is just the kiss of death for ITPs. They worry about, they really don't like being micromanaged. They like to do things in their own way. They like having space around them when they work. And that inferior function also comes in with those fears of rejection, abandonment. That comes through a lot. I've coached so many ITPs who they feel confident when it comes to their logic. They feel very confident when it comes to their ability to understand something in depth, but they feel like it's really frustrating for them because when they try to express that side of themselves, it's met with kind of like shrugs. Like, oh, there he goes again, talking about that information or correcting my, logical inconsistency. And this is something that I always get on a soapbox about, because say you have an extroverted feeling dominant type, like an ENFJ or an ESFJ, and their dominant function is interpersonal connection and harmony and reading the room and getting, into intimacy with other people. That dominant function is really generally praised by the world. People see it as, wow, that person's so likable, right? And the struggle that I often see ITPs having is their dominant function when they try to lean into it, which is clarity of information and clarity of data and accuracy. That tends to not have the same effect as that like warm, connective, extroverted feeling. And so sometimes ITPs feel like by expressing themselves and their ideas, they're kind of shrugged off by people or even dismissed, seen as being arrogant, which is often not where the place they're coming from. So rejection is a fear that many of them have actually had to face quite frequently. And, this is just something that I feel really strongly and passionately about as someone who really loves these types. I just feel like if we could give them the honor of like appreciating where they're coming from, the fact that they try to provide clarity of information, clarity of data, help people understand things more clearly. I mean, these are the people you want if you need to troubleshoot a complex problem. I mean, we take them for granted when we need that kind of help, but sometimes we forget to really appreciate how much mental energy and genius is really behind all that. And I know I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but I always have to do that whole speech. And Daniel, you are an ESTP. You have introverted thinking as well. So you also probably relate a little bit to this. And why don't you explain, you use introverted thinking. Do you relate to some of these fears and some of these experiences? And also, while you do that, I'm also going to see if anyone in the comments has anything they'd like to add to this section.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I have very often tended to over explain things with TI being my auxiliary or my second function. Somebody will ask me a simple question that probably could be answered with a yes or no, but it's like, yes, but only because of this, and this. If one of these things was different, then it would be a no. And they don't really care necessarily. They might just want the yes or no, but I feel compelled to explain why it is the yes and how close it came to being a no, so because it's like, it's not necessarily, it doesn't always seem cut and dry. And so I definitely relate to sometimes that over expressing myself in the details, and that socially is not maybe the acceptable way to express that information. But I also, that fear of incompetency or incompetence or stupidity. Absolutely. I think I was talking with you the other night and I was like, you know what? TI knows, introverted thinking knows what it doesn't know. And it wants to fill those gaps. And if it doesn't have that data to work with, and it's forced to do something with it anyway, that's a fear.
Mm-hmm.
Having to move forward without feeling like it has all the information it needs to fill in those knowledge gaps to make the right decision, so that people aren't looking at you in hindsight going, why'd you make that decision? That was dumb. It's like, well, I didn't have all the information. Yeah, so that's definitely a big plays in for me.
Yeah, 100%. We've talked about this a lot. And then Lisa said, my husband is INTP. I see the fear of emotional manipulation, that's for sure. Especially as an INFJ, unfortunately, you can use that. I try not to. And I think, Lisa, that's amazing that you even have that self-awareness. So many people, it's a struggle to know. But yeah, ITPs, that is a fear that maybe if I really give into my feelings or give into a person, and because they do want to have good connections with other people, they do want to feel emotionally connected to other people. It's just the process of getting there can feel like such a challenge. And so if someone offers them that but is using it as a way to manipulate, it's like such a slap in the face, because it's like, oh, I want this thing, but I also feel really vulnerable around this thing, and you use this vulnerable part of me to get something from me. And that can just feel like massively offensive to ITPs. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And also, I hope you aren't beating yourself up too much about that. I mean, we all have ways, especially in relationships, where sometimes unknowingly we can manipulate situations using our functions. And that's actually, it could be another stream sometime. Maybe we could talk about type and manipulation.
Yeah,
that'd be a good one.
That'd be kind of fun.
Awesome. So we're going to go in next into the INFPs and ISFPs, those introverted feeling types. I know we had some INFPs here. I hope you're still here. Hopefully you're still with us, because I want to definitely hear your thoughts on this. Oh, I forgot to put change these headlines. It says dominant TI and inferior FE. So just pretend that says dominant FI and inferior TE, okay? So introverted feeling types are all about emotional integrity. They want to make sure that they're living in alignment with their conscience. So they're always weighing things like, dislike, right, wrong, and trying to understand what they feel inner conviction around, and then guiding their life by what they feel inner conviction around. And so they are constantly on this kind of inner quest for living a life that feels totally aligned with their authentic self and totally aligned with what they feel is right or wrong.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Lisa over on Facebook was saying that they lost sound, so I don't know if we need to check something there.
Okay, let
me. Real quick.
I don't have. Oh, wait, I do have my phone on me. Maybe I can just quickly.
She says it's back now.
Oh, okay.
Yay! It fixed itself.
And yes, Doug, I'm not an AI. Thank you. I think an AI would probably have better skin or something. Probably wouldn't say as much. But yeah, so INFPs and ISFPs, they're on that quest for inner alignment. I know it does look like the slides are wrong, because I forgot when I was putting this in, I accidentally wrote dominant TI for IFPs and inferior FE, but the rest of the text is correct. So if you just pretend that says the right thing. So introverted feeling types dominant types have inferior extroverted thinking. So where they tend to struggle is they struggle with coming up with the structure to make their ideals a reality. They can struggle with the planning, with getting everything effectively lined up and organized. They have a lot of amazing ideas, and they're strong heart feelings about things, but they can also struggle with, how do I make this thing real? How do I make this thing a reality? They can really hesitate, to tell people what to do, to take charge of situations. They can feel like that in doing so that they're coming across as bossy or controlling. They can often worry or feel insecure or fear around being judged as being disorganized or by not having a plan. In situations where they have to like take the lead and organize a project, they can feel really insecure and afraid. Like, oh gosh, what if I do this wrong? What if my plan isn't right? What if I'm not, structuring this the right way? That can be really scary for them. They might procrastinate on practical tasks, and then those come up and bite them later. Maybe they put off doing things like, again, the taxes can come up. Tasks that require them to really just like logically assess things and put them in order and get, all the numbers right, that kind of thing. That can be really stressful for them. And they can be really worried, oh gosh, I'm probably going to get this wrong. And so they may put it off, and then later on that can create problems. They definitely, just like ITPs, really yearn for emotional connection with people, even though they might not, actually ask for it. IFPs can really yearn for that effectiveness, the results, having the plan, having the clear strategy, having their logistics in order. They can want all of that, but it can feel like kind of out of reach. And so that leads to some of the fears. And this slide is actually correct. Yay. And yes, library said it's exhausting, and 100% it's exhausting because people tend to look at results a lot. Like they well, what's your return on investment for something? What are your numbers? That's what the world cares about a lot. The world is constantly asking for evidence that your ideals and your passions have some, outward impact, right? And as an FI dom, as an introverted feeling type, coming up with the strategy to make, to be able to say to someone, look what I did. Here's proof that my ideals, like the things I care passionately about, that the energy I'm putting into this actually has an output. That can be, it can feel like people are kind of like brushing you off a lot. Like, oh, well, those numbers aren't great. Or can you prove that your feelings actually make sense, or that your convictions actually matter? And it just feels like the world is testing. I feel like the world tests IP types a lot. I feel like it definitely doesn't take them as seriously as it should. So the fears that back to this slide, the fears that got brought up a lot for IFPs, one was moral compromise. Sometimes IFPs feel like, well, I need to be part of the system. Like I have to actually, make a paycheck or, have results. But they worry that in the process of doing that they're going to give up something that gives them alignment. They're going to give up part of their conscience, part of what makes them them. And so there's a lot of fear around that, and that can create fear around commitment. Fear that maybe I'm going to commit to the wrong side, or maybe I'm going to commit to the wrong person. Maybe I'm going to commit to something or someone that does not let me be fully myself or live in alignment with myself. There's a fear of failure, fear that you are going to keep perfecting your ideals, but maybe you're not going to have something to show for it. There's fear of being controlled, being under systems, rules, and structures that don't actually care about your ethics, your conscience, what's right or wrong to you. Fear of powerlessness, knowing what's right, but being unable to make a change in the world. I definitely see this a lot with IFPs. I would say in the world right now, but I mean, it's kind of been a pattern where, if they feel like the world is going in a direction that goes against their values, it's just like absolutely like crushing for them. And it's like, well, what can I do that can make a change? And that's where that inferior TE wants to be like, I have a strategy, I have a plan, I have this roadmap to how we're going to fix this. And sometimes because that function feels a little out of reach, they can feel like, oh, I have all these like great ideals in my heart, all these amazing convictions, and I feel really strongly about this, but I don't know how to make it have an impact. And so there's this fear that the world is just going to keep getting worse, and corruption of the world and evil in the world. These were two things that just came up again and again by IFPs when it came to fears that they had. Another thing, fear of being powerless. We talked about that a little bit. ISFPs, if you're dealing with a ISFP specifically, a lot of that can come down to, again, that physical powerlessness. If you're ever dealing with a type that is an SP type, there's a lot of that physical powerlessness that can feel really terrifying. not being able to move, not being able to take action. So these are all things that I've heard from so many times from IFPs. And I see, I'm going to just check the comments. Karen says, my sister is an ISFP and she spent her whole life thinking she couldn't be organized. Then she ended up running a small nonprofit because no one else would, and it was important to her. And she led the merger of it with another group. I was so proud of her. That is awesome. I'm proud of your sister too. And I think here's what I want to say is when I'm talking about this fear or the inferior function, it's definitely not a death sentence. It does not mean that you can't integrate this function. IFPs, I've seen IFPs do this, and it takes practice. It takes a lot of work and a lot of sweat, but like you can integrate extroverted thinking. The key is to, integrate your inferior function at times when you feel like you've got the bandwidth to do it. If you're already having a really stressful day and you're at your wit's end, do not try to start integrating TE at that point as an INFP or an ISFP, because you will just push yourself into what's called the grip. But if you have a lot of bandwidth on a certain day, you feel like you've got the energy, that's a time when that's when you try to focus on, okay, let me take 20 minutes and just try to focus on the logistics of what I need to do. Like, I have this idea. What are some ways I can, logically organize this? And if you start feeling yourself getting just like completely depleted, because your energy for your inferior function will expire faster, then, make sure you're taking a breather at that point also. I want to say Mr. J had a comment. He said, let me go back to the ISTP, ESTPs for a second. ESTPs do not typically over-explain. That is an ISTP, TI kind of thing. TI is in an ESTP's second position, so it's not as comfortable for them to use. On this, so I would say I've definitely seen ETPs do the TI explaining thing. I think, everyone has different experiences, but I'll say it kind of depends on the situation. When you're dealing with an ESTP, and again, I'm not trying to just contradict your experience, but I've seen ESTPs, they like to be action oriented. They like to be out doing stuff more than just explaining things. Like, Daniel, if you had a choice between explaining how stocks work or actually trading in the stock market, you'd prefer trading in the stock market.
Oh, absolutely.
But if someone's going to start asking you about the stock market and wanting to know about it, then you're going to try to explain it accurately. And sometimes in the process of doing that, you're going to go beyond just the bullet points and explaining how that works. So the second function is the parent function of the personality type. So that's the way that each type tends to show care and support for other people. So sometimes what you'll find with ETPs is that their way of showing care and support is by clarifying information for other people. But again, that could be a whole long tangent. But I want to see what you think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would just say this, that I would agree for the most part that ESTPs tend to prefer to be brief and concise. Okay. I think by and large, that is their main way of functioning. I do think, like you said, is that if we're asked about something that we're knowledgeable about, we've acquired all this information and have experience with, and people are really picking our brain over it, then we will tend to then go into a lot of detail of what we know. So there is kind of the two ways of operating for an ESTP, I think, on that way, but yeah, so I think it can kind of fall either way, but I think if we had the option, then we would prefer to just be direct and concise most of the time.
Yeah, I would agree with you. In fact, especially ISTPs, they're definitely people of few words generally in my experience. And I saw a question from Doug. He said, Susan, push yourself to what's called what? I think I missed something there. So if you don't mind, I think I missed something in that question. I might have said something and then moved on, and now I can't recall it for sure. So if you remember like the context of that, I would love to answer that for you. And then ENTJ Gregory says, I love INTPs. It's like looking in a mirror if I can shut my mouth. Interesting. Yeah, like we can learn. I think the extroverted thinking types and the introverted thinking types, if you can have patience and curiosity about each other, can learn so much. Also, apologies if I'm talking way too fast. I tend to do that being from New Jersey. All right. That brings us to ENTJs and ESTJs, actually. So ENTJs, ESTJs, they're dominant extroverted thinking types. They are focused on the metrics. They're focused on the return on investment, getting things done. Tend to be very productive, goal-oriented people. They're good at noticing the most efficient way to achieve something. How can they get the results for the least amount of wasted energy? And they're interested in how to use something. So one way I like to describe it is introverted thinking is interested in how something works for its own sake. Extroverted thinking is interested in how to use the thing to get somewhere. Like, how do I use this to get to the goal? Extroverted thinking types are all about objective logic. What's the evidence? What do we have to prove that something's correct? And they're very focused on competence. They tend to show their love by getting things done for people, by organizing life, by being hardworking. But there is, again, that inferior introverted feeling that's still a huge part of who they are. So inferior introverted feeling can show up in ETJs as an uneasiness with emotional vulnerability. A lot of ETJs, if they have to reveal themselves to someone else, they can feel like it's like they're walking into school and they don't have any clothes on. We've all had that dream, right? We've all had that dream where you go to school and you go somewhere where there's all these people and all of a sudden you realize you're not wearing anything. I feel like I have one of these at least once a month, even now. That's how ETJs can feel when they have to reveal their feelings to people, when they are becoming emotional around other people. So there's a huge fear about that. It feels super scary. They often avoid discussing their feelings and emotions because when they do, there's often this inner voice that's like, oh, you're being so immature, you're being so childish, you're being weak. And that's just, so when they get in those situations where they have to, it's like, oh my gosh, please let this end as soon as possible. I have an ENTJ dad, and I noticed that anytime, the family, there'd be a conversation that was getting more emotionally revealing, he'd get up and he'd say, well, it's time for me to go to bed right now. Good night, everyone. Like every time. It's like, okay, this is not comfortable for me. Inferior introverted feeling can also cause ETJs to struggle to know what makes them genuinely happy. So introverted feeling is so much about what makes you feel aligned with your conscience, what makes you feel right on the inside. And a lot of times when you have introverted feeling high in your function stack, it also gives you an understanding what you like, the things that bring you joy, the things that you hate, the things that you really dislike as well. But if you have inferior introverted feeling and you are an extroverted thinking type, you're so focused on tasks, projects, and productivity that sometimes you can struggle to know what brings me joy, what makes me feel like I'm in alignment, what makes me feel good and authentic in my soul. What are the things that really bring a sense of peace to me? You can be so focused on doing that you're not focused on the meaning, and the soul happiness on the inside. So ETJs can struggle because they can be very active and very productive. They can get the results that they want, but at the same time, they can struggle with a feeling of emptiness on the inside. So they might secretly often really want to be known for who they really are. They want to be able to feel confident talking about the things that really matter to them or expressing their values, but it just feels so scary to do it. And that brings us to those fears. So fear of failure is huge for ETJs. They hate feeling like they could ever be incompetent or that they go after something and it just falls apart. They pride themselves on knowing how to get something done, on how to achieve their goals, and how to do it as quickly as possible. So failure just hits huge for them. It's a huge hit to the ego. Fear of mediocrity. ETJs tend to be very competitive. They tend to challenge themselves a lot. They get bored if they're not being challenged. And so there's a fear of mediocrity, like, oh, I'm just a regular day-to-day person with no big goals and with no big challenge I need to overcome. That can feel really draining for them. Fear of stupidity, being wrong or uninformed, and especially being under the incompetent leadership. And I think Gregory, was the one who mentioned this earlier. was, having poor leadership is just the kiss of death for ETJ types. They absolutely hate it. Because they feel like there's often with ETJs a sense of, I know how to get things done. I know what we need to do to achieve this goal. Earlier we were talking about the function you use when you have that I got this feeling. And for ETJs, that I got this feeling comes from organizing resources and logistics and managing procedures in order to get the outcome you need as fast as possible, making quick, decisive decisions to get to the end result. That's where they feel like they've got things. So if they have leadership with someone who's kind of disorganized, wishy-washy, is all talk but doesn't have a plan, that just feels so overwhelming to them. They just want to grab, let me have the steering wheel and drive this because you're just driving us off the rails. And so being under poor leadership it sounds funny to say it's a fear, but it really is. It really is a fear. Fear of vulnerability, emotional vulnerability especially. Expressing their true feelings, expressing hard feelings, crying around someone else. That can feel just like, oh, just kill me now. Like that can feel horrible for an ETJ. And I'm an INTJ, and I so relate to a lot of these. But ETJs, especially, it's like if they're going to cry, they want to be alone, alone in a closed, locked, bolted room where no one can possibly get in. But integrating that introverted feeling sometimes means letting people in, and that can be super scary, but also super rewarding in the long run. And then that fear of emptiness, like the ETJs have such a drive for productivity, so have such a drive to get things done, but they worry that what if I get a lot done, but it doesn't mean anything? What if I wasn't really happy or satisfied in this pursuit of getting things done? And then Gigi said, I was referring to your name. How does it change? How does my name change?
I think that was a previous conversation with Gregory.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. That's my problem. I'll be talking, then I'll go back to the comments because I want to like interact with people, but I also want to make sure that I am not. I'm not.
That's what you've got me here for. I'm like listening and looking at your slides and reading all like. Give me more sensory.
You can also type responses too, I think. I don't know if you can as a co-host, but Daniel.
I can't in here, unfortunately, or else I would be.
Any thoughts, Daniel, on the ETJ situation with stress or with fear? Have you ever encountered this? I know you probably encountered TJs in the military.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So like there's definitely I want to put this as nicely as possible.
Uh-oh.
No. It's not a bad thing. It's just that like I tend to butt heads with TJs. Because
that's why you married one.
I know. Well, I mean, I have definitely grown in my understanding of them. I think ETJs are definitely harder for me to get along with than an ITJ. But I think it's like TJs are definitely about the production and the output and the get the next thing done and the next thing done, which is hard for me to be like, well, but is this the right way of doing it? Anyway, but they definitely can't be seen to fail. Like that incompetency is huge for them. They can't like, and sometimes it creates a problem where they're unwilling to be questioned or challenged because it feels to them maybe sometimes like someone's saying they're incompetent, because they are so like driven, and they usually are quite good at what they're doing, right? Like I'm not saying that they're incompetent. They usually are quite good, but yeah. So that's seeing that a lot of times it's like, well, everybody fails, everybody makes mistakes, but like they want to be kind of invulnerable that way, which is a difficult thing for me to interact with them on.
One thing about ENTJs, ESTJs, and ESTPs is they all have what's called an in-charge interaction style. And when you get two in-charge interaction styles, people working together, there can be like a butting of heads. Yeah. Like, no, they tend to all feel like they know the best way to do something. Mm-hmm. And so that definitely can be a challenge when you get ESTPs and ENTJs together is that they're both like, no, I'm in charge. I got this. And the other person, no, I got it. Because extroverted sensing and extroverted thinking kind of look like each other a little bit because they're both very action oriented. They're both very focused on like, getting into action, making those quick decisions. But the difference is extroverted sensing is more about the kinesthetic physical part, like let's just improvise and be spontaneous and just get something done. Extroverted thinking is very focused on like, it knows the numbers. It knows the resources that it's working with and just kind of organizing versus just like jumping into action. So there's a lot more differences, but I mean, that would be again, another tangent. Who else has this in charge style? So in charge would be ENFJ, ENTJ, ESTP, and ENFJ actually. ENFJs are also in charge, but they tend to have it be in charge in a warmer way that maybe doesn't give them as many enemies in the process. I definitely, I go to bat for the thinking dominant types a lot because I feel like, especially doing what I do, writing about type, the number of, hateful comments towards thinking dominant people is just so many that I feel like, oh no, I've got to defend these people. Because I think what it really comes down to is all these types are so caring. Like, they're all showing it in different ways. The way an ENTJ or ESTJ is going to show they care is so different from the way, an INFP or an ISFP is going to do it. But, I feel defensive of any type when they, people don't like them. And then Mr. J says, ENTJs do not like to be, ENTJs do not like to be challenged at all, whereas ESTPs don't really mind being challenged. Would you say that's true, Daniel?
It depends on what it's on. I would say, at least for me, it's, sometimes I want to be like, listen, I am literally an expert in this area. Please don't challenge me because it's just a waste of both of our time. Are
you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Just pause. It just froze for just a second.
Oh.
Yeah, and I feel like ENTJs, if they can get challenged in something where there's it's not on a time.
Yes.
Related, I found that they can enjoy like a intellectual debate. That can be exciting for them. But if it's like they got a job to do or they're on any kind of like a time constraint, then they just leave them alone and let them lead is often how they feel.
Yeah.
All right. So then we're getting into the ENFJs and the ESFJs. And so JJ, I'm glad you're here to be part of this discussion. Hopefully we have some other extroverted feeling. I don't know, Melissa, you are ESFJ, so I'm glad you're here also. So dominant extroverted feeling types, these are the types that they do a lot of work to make sure that people feel comfortable. Think of emotional labor. For me anyway, I often think of extroverted feeling types because they're reading the room. They're noticing how people feel. They're picking up on all those emotional nuances that a lot of us, speaking as a thinking type, you can miss. And they're very focused on just creating that harmony, creating that connection. They want to get more intimate with people, more connected. They want to create a positive vibe. They, if the energy is positive and people are sharing freely and they feel like they can just be themselves, that's an energy that an extroverted feeling type really likes. So they're really good at nurturing and supporting that. And they'll do a lot of work to make sure that happens, whether that's, setting the right music in the room to create a certain vibe, or even having the right snacks or drinks, or just making the right jokes to make people feel comfortable. So that connection, that intimacy is so important. But then they have inferior introverted thinking. And that function, that's the one that we talked about with ITPs. It's about taking things apart and understanding how they work, poking holes in your beliefs to understand, what's true and what's false. It's about having radical honesty and checking everything that you think or feel for any kind of like bias or inconsistency. But because EFJs have inferior introverted thinking, sometimes they worry that, what if my logic isn't right? They can get stuck in these analysis paralysis episodes that last for a really long time. When they're alone, they can actually be super analytical and get stuck in analysis paralysis, trying to understand, what is this belief I have really accurate? Or did this thing I explained, especially social things. Like I was having a conversation with my friend, but what if this thing I said sounded stupid? Or what if it didn't make sense? They often worry that the way they're expressing their opinions, like maybe they didn't express it in a way that was logical enough. They tend to be really hard on their logic. They doubt their logic. And so sometimes they can feel really uneasy in a debate situation. In any situation where someone's challenging their beliefs and on the spot, they have to, defend what they believe. They have to defend their values. That can be super terrifying for an EFJ. And it's not because they're not smart, because they can absolutely be super smart. It's that they're trying to, that introverted thinking process, they feel so much vulnerability around it. So if they're having to defend the nitty gritty logic of why they believe what they do on the spot in public, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier with ETJs, where they feel like when they have to be, express themselves emotionally in public, it feels like walking into school without your clothes on. EFJs can feel that way when they have to defend the logic of their beliefs in public. They can feel like, oh my gosh, what if I'm getting this wrong? What if under the pressure of trying to do this process publicly, I say something really stupid and my credibility is just completely thrown off. So they may avoid situations where they're forced to defend their beliefs or values in some way, where they're going to be around someone who might try to poke holes in it. That might be kind of scary for them. JJ says, stop talking about me, Susan. And I'm so sorry, because I have so many FJ types that I love, and this is something, my mom is a SFJ. And she tends to, in situations where, say, a belief is challenged that would require some, back and forth intellectual, logical debate, she'll literally like lay down and just be like, I'm so tired. I think I'm going to fall asleep. It's so funny because the ETJs and the EFJs can both do it in different ways. My ENTJ dad be like, I'm tired, time for bed, when people start getting emotionally revealing in a conversation. My EFJ or FJ mom, feeling judging mom, will be like, oh, I'm tired, it's time to sleep, when there's like a discussion that could start making her have to defend a belief logically. And especially if it might disrupt the harmony. EFJs want the connection to be good. They don't ever want that to feel broken in any way. So if everyone's having a great time, say at Thanksgiving dinner or a holiday dinner, everyone's having a great time, the vibe is good, people are laughing, they're sharing great stories, they're talking about, reminiscing over experiences or whatever it is. And then someone's like, well, that political belief doesn't stand up to scrutiny when you do this, this, this. An EFJ might kind of freeze up and be like, oh no, there's now the threat of disharmony, which dominant extroverted feeling is always going to be trying to protect that. And so now someone's threatening it. And so they start feeling kind of scared, like, oh no, the mood's going to be off. So they might make a joke like, oh, isn't that funny? Like, we all have different beliefs, but we all love each other, right? Like they might try to bring it back to a harmonious place. But then if it keeps going and they feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to actually defend something I believe in, and I have to not just defend it based on my ethics or what feels, like how people feel, but just like logic, pure and simple data, then that can feel terrifying for them because their harmony is threatened, and also they are worried that their logic might be off. So they're very self-critical when it comes to their own logic. Mm-hmm. JJ says, you are 100% accurate, though. Won't talk about politics or religion. Definitely experience this a lot with EFJs. Sometimes as an INTJ, I have to restrain myself because I tend to want to poke at those things that nobody wants to talk about. Daniel knows this over many awkward family conversations. But even though ENFJs and ESFJs have inferior introverted thinking, this doesn't mean they don't care about accuracy or logic. They do care about it. It's actually really important to them. It's just that they do sometimes fear that maybe the belief systems that they have won't hold up to scrutiny. So that's another fear. And so sometimes in those situations where a belief or especially a deeply held value is being threatened, that's an even bigger existential fear. Like, oh no, if you keep talking, you might make me doubt something that's really important to me. So that can be really scary for sure. And I know some of these are I'll be repeating myself talking about them, but these are the fears that come up a lot for EFJs. Fear of disconnection. losing a relationship that's important to you, breaking up a relationship, any kind of disconnection from yourself and other people. A lot of EFJs told me that they have fears of being alone, not having meaningful relationships. I've spoken to a lot of EFJs who are struggling now, and in the world feels more disconnected. People, hang out more digitally now than they do in person. So I've spoken to a lot of EFJs who feel like they're missing that sense of community, and there's a lot of fear around that. It can feel really scary. Fear of conflict. We kind of touched on that already. Fear of criticism, giving and receiving. If you are an EFJ and you're in a managerial position and you have to critique someone's work or tell them they're fired, that's terrifying. Absolutely. Fear of being wrong. EFJs really want to have correct logic, and they don't like situations where they might be inaccurate. That can feel really scary. Fear of wasted devotion. And that's that realizing you lived for a belief, a value, or maybe even a person, and it wasn't accurate, or maybe the person wasn't who they said they were. That can be super, super scary. I'd like to hand the mic over to you, though, Daniel. Any thoughts you have on this? Because you have definitely have had EFJs in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think something that I've seen personally is that fear of disconnection is also like almost like a fear of their desire to connect not being reciprocated by the people they care about. And that's like such a huge concern. And sometimes for all of us, for all of our types, our fears can become self-fulfilling prophecies if we allow that to kind of take over. Because like as an FE dominant type, like if you're worried about that, you might really go out of your way to really push that connection, but then that feels too clingy or overbearing to the person you want to connect with, and then they do disconnect. And so and it isn't just for FE dominant types. That's for all of our types. If we really lean in too heavily to try to compensate for our fears, a lot of times we can cause them to happen as well. So, I mean, I'm FE tertiary, so it's much lower down. But I get uncomfortable in some of those same situations that an FE dom does, right? Like sometimes, if the conflict in communication is too personal, I get uncomfortable with it. If it's an intellectual thing, if it's not personal, if it's just like a thing, an object, or a system, and we're discussing which one is better, fine. Tear mine to shreds. I don't really care. But if it comes to like my feelings or my beliefs or something that's quite personal to me, then it becomes much harder for me to feel as open about discussing it and being as direct with it. So I do relate a little bit with FE dominant types on that wavelength.
Yeah.
I don't like giving. I don't know if I care about the person. I don't like giving criticism. Right? Like if I feel like I don't like giving you criticism. Right?
Well, I think we've talked about this. Like when it comes to your friends and it comes to other people, you're fine with it. It's I think like our relationship is definitely like that's a whole other ball game.
So I mean, I love FE doms. Like, I mean, I can't imagine somebody who wouldn't really appreciate them because they are like amazing at making you feel like cared for and seen. Like they really, really, really see other people and care about making sure things are good for them. And that's an amazing quality. I'm around an FE dominant type, and a lot of times I'm like, dang, I need to be more like that. Like that was so nice. I want people to feel like that when I'm around. So but there are, I mean, it's hard because it's like you can see the good side of them. And you don't always see the fears that people are struggling with internally. Right. And that goes for every single type. You don't always see the fears and the struggles inside that they're dealing with. And so, I love that we've gone through and looked at all of these different types this way, because I feel like, it really is a great way to start thinking about these other these other types and what they might have a fear around that we are, maybe unknowingly stressing them out over these fears by pushing them into these corners that aren't a big deal for us, but are super stressful and anxiety inducing for them. So like, I think this is super helpful that way.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think knowing type in this way is extremely helpful because so many times we are good at something and we're like, well, why are you having a hard time with that? Like, say, and as an INTJ, for example, I'm like, well, why are you having a hard time thinking about the future or making a plan or, or, seeing where this is obviously going to lead, right? If I'm act like that to Daniel, for example, well, that's going to make him feel really inferior because I'm literally picking on his inferior function. And it's going to make him feel like crap about things. In the same way, if he's like, why are you so in your head? Didn't you see this obvious thing? Why are you going so slow? Can't you just be more action oriented? He's going to make me feel inferior. And so we often make people feel inferior when, if you are dominant in something and someone else is inferior in that, or worse, they have it in their shadow, and you start poking at it, like, why can't you do this thing? Why aren't you more like this? If you tell an ENTJ, why aren't you talking to me about your feelings? Why are you going over there to cry and you're not crying to me? Well, you're really poking on the thing that they already feel kind of crap about. We already kind of feel bad about our struggles in our inferior function. And so when someone's poking at it, it can feel really like, wow, you just don't care about me at all. Like, why are you doing this?
Right.
And so knowing type can really help us to pause and be like, okay, this is an area where maybe I need to have more sensitivity. And I also wanted to bring up JJ's comment here. She said, if I have to confront or address a difficult issue, I will probably pad it with a lot of affirming words or something positive about them first. In midlife now, and I'm able to break harmony. And I think midlife is where a lot of people start to integrate that inferior function more. They start to feel a little bit more comfortable with it. They've had more life experiences that have allowed them to experiment with it. And so I think that's just great feedback. And then I noticed there was a question from someone up here. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss it. Where did it go? Oh, Gigi asked, so how can we make them think critically without feeling attacked? So I think that EFJs do think critically, but it tends to be more like in their own space, in their own time kind of thing. On the spot is when it feels scary. And I think when, in order to make them not feel attacked, it's obviously better in a one-on-one situation as opposed to, say, you're in a big group and everyone's listening. Because as you can imagine, if you're doing something you're self-conscious about, if you're doing it in front of a big group versus one-on-one with someone who genuinely cares about you, there's going to be a whole different energy. And then if you just come at it with patience, don't push them to be really talkative or defend themselves like, fast. And that's something that, even as an INTJ, I have to be careful of, because sometimes I can itch for a debate. Daniel's seen this. Like, I don't mind debating religion. I don't mind debating politics. I don't mind debating most things. And, to me, I'm like, oh, this is fine. I still think we're great friends. There's no hard feelings here, right? But and sometimes it can just be like a rapid fire, like, oh, what about this? Have you thought about this? And it's like, it's not very nice to do sometimes. Sometimes it's not the time or place to do it. And so if you are working as an EFJ, be considerate of the fact that, spend one-on-one time with them if you want to have more of a discussion like this. Assure them that you genuinely care about them and that they don't have to defend themselves to you, but you're just curious. If you approach it with curiosity more than this is a game I have to win, that's really important. And then also be sure to give them time to think about it, because introverted thinking needs rumination time. Any introverted function needs time to kind of simmer on things. So if you're in an intellectual debate with an ESFJ or an ENFJ and you want rapid fire logical responses, you're not giving them time to simmer on the information. And so you're kind of short circuiting their ability to really be, to engage with you in a meaningful way. Let's see. So we have, I know it's been a lot. That was all 16 types right there. It was a lot.
I know Lisa did ask, will it be available to rewatch? And it will be
Yes.
on YouTube, correct? Like it'll
Yes, and
be sort on your page there.
it will be available to rewatch on YouTube. I also tried to get it shared to my Facebook page as well. So yeah, if you missed any part of this, you'll be able to go back and watch it later on at any point. And so I just so have enjoyed having all of you here. And this has been so much fun. It's funny, interesting. JJ, I actually met at a personality hacker conference, and we were sitting next to each other during an exercise. And hopefully you don't mind me bringing this up, JJ, but it was so funny because this is the story we both know Denzel Mensa. Anyway, he's told this story. JJ was talking to me. She was like, oh, I really like your blog or something like that. And I was so surprised that she knew who I was. Apparently my face read as like discomfort and like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? Instead of like how I actually felt, which was very honored and like pleasantly surprised that someone was there who knew who I was and had read my stuff. But apparently my face was reading like, what in the world is this person talking to me? And I've thought about that so many times since that conversation. Like, oh my gosh, that person I met, and I couldn't recall your name until like you showed up here. I was like, oh my gosh, that person I met at the personality hacker conference. Apparently I looked really annoyed that they knew who I was, but really I was actually very like kind of embarrassed, but also like excited that you had read my stuff. So I wanted to say that now that I have the chance to do it. JJ, it was like actually meant a lot to me that you knew my blog and you had read my content. And I was just like surprised that I was sitting next to someone who had done that. So thank you for that. And yeah, don't ever judge an INTJ by their facial expressions.
Yeah.
A lot of times our face is doing something we don't know it's doing, and it isn't even accurately necessarily portraying how we're feeling on the inside. So I think this was a lot of fun. We are going to try to do this every week. And so next week, I don't know what our topic is going to be. Me and Daniel are going to talk it over probably tomorrow.
Yep.
But come back. Like, let us
Yes,
come back and join this conversation. This is so fun. I loved having all of you here. JJ, Melissa, John, Karen, Gigi. I mean, so many great questions and insights from all of you. And this was just felt so fun to actually connect with you guys. So come back next week. And I can't leave without saying, hey, if you're not sure about your type, or if you want to get coaching about your type, so you want to get into those cognitive functions and figure out what they're like, or what the placements mean. Say you're an INFJ and you want to know what your shadow functions are, whatever it is. If you would like to set up a session like that, you can set that up on my website. I'll try to leave a link in the description at some point. I don't know how that works with these live things. But you can also book a session with me on psychologyjunkie.com. And I would love to talk with you one-on-one to help you understand your type better. If you're not sure what personality type is your best fit, I'd love to help you with that. So you can always check that out. Thank you. Lightbearers Library. Again, if you're watching and you want to check out a cool INFP, check out her channel. It's really good. Thank you, Cutthroat Beast. I remember you from the other sessions we had. It was so much fun. Any parting words, Daniel?
I mean, I've had a blast here. I know you've been the main face of Psychology Junkie for years and years and years, and I'm just excited to kind of like jump in here and start contributing and being a part of these calls and bring the ESTP vibe into the videos and the chats and live streams. And I have a blast. I get so much entertainment just from like watching everybody's chats off the side and conversations. Like, it's really fun for me. So please do come back next week. And I look forward to seeing you all here.
Me too. This was so much fun. I can't wait for next week. We're going to have so much fun. And I hope I get to know you guys. I mean, in a few months, if you guys keep showing up, we'll know each other so well. So right. This is going to be fun. See you guys next week. And yeah, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, everyone. You all have a wonderful Wednesday night. See you next time.
Have a good night.